I like to dissect girls. Did you know that I'm utterly insane?
Impressive. Very nice.
Never in my life did I think I'd be dressed up as Patrick Bateman doing a YouTube video on books I think you'd like, but here we are. And with that, happy Halloween. If you haven't guessed, I'm going as Patrick Bateman for Halloween. So American Psycho by Bret Easton Ellis is probably one of the most disturbing but also amazing books that I have ever read. And Patrick Bateman as a character intrigues me so much, like I really like him in a bit of a weird way. And as mentioned, I want to talk about 10 books that I think you would like, and I'm also mentioning them because I think you might like them as well. I'm going to start with the obvious books and then get a bit more niche, but let me know what you think of them. I really wish Patrick Bateman had a good reads because I honestly think I would eat those reviews up. And if you're new to the channel and you haven't seen me before, hello, I am Katerina. This is not what I usually look like, but I do make content about books, and if that's something you're into, why don't you consider subscribing? And with that being said, let's get into the video. So in case you haven't seen American Psycho, I'm going to give you a quick rundown of what it's about. It's a psychological thriller novel set in 1980s New York, and we follow a very wealthy investment banker called Patrick Bateman. He's a successful businessman. However, he has a bit of a dark secret, and that's the fact that he is a mental serial killer. And his life essentially shows the dark side of the American dream, that he has all this material success, but he also engages in very violent, extreme acts. And his life essentially shows the dark side of the American dream. He has success from all this material wealth, but he also indulges in extreme acts of violence. And throughout the book, we see Bateman live this dual life until the lines between reality and his psychotic fantasies begin to blur. And as a result, we see Bateman possess the following personality traits. He's narcissistic, he is obsessed with his status, wealth, and lifestyle in order to flex over others. He shows no empathy or remorse for any of the horrific acts of violence that he commits. He's obsessive in the fact that he almost performs ritual-like behavior when it comes to his exercise, grooming, and also his murders. And he's paranoid. He's constantly having to question the reality he's in and also the perception of those around him. And with all that being said, let's get into the 10 books I think that he would like. Also, side note, there is currently a cat outside my window and it's staring at me, and I don't know if it's processing the fact that I have blood on my face, but we're gonna move regardless. The very first book on my list is The Collector by John Fowles. The story is set in England, and we follow a girl who is an art student, and at the very start of the book she gets abducted into the back of a van by a man who ends up imprisoning her in his own cellar, believing that he can coerce her affection through captivity. The guy also has an obsession with collecting butterflies, believing that they hold more inherent value if he can keep them himself. And the novel's really cool because it alternates between perspectives of this guy and also this girl, and it just gives really chilling insights into both sides of the story. I believe that Bateman would eat this up for a variety of reasons. Firstly, I think that he would very much relate to the obsessive and controlling aspects that this guy has, especially in relation of the need to exert control over others in order to assert dominance and power. Like, Patrick Bateman keeps girls hostage in his own way, and he gets off on having complete physical control over them. I think he'd also heavily relate to this dual life that this guy has. In the book, by day, he's just a shy introvert guy working a normal job, when in reality, he's literally keeping a girl hostage. And also, I think Bateman would like it because it's very much centered around dehumanizing their victims to the point where they just see them as objects. Oh, the joys of being a woman and not being perceived as human by some men. Great. That being said, I actually loved this book, and I honestly believe that Patrick Bateman would too. Okay, so moving on to the second book on the list, I think you would very much enjoy Ripe by Sarah Rose Etter. So, set in Silicon Valley, this novel revolves around a young woman who works at a high-pressure tech company. However, she ultimately finds herself trapped in this toxic corporate nightmare of horrible bosses, long hours, and working on illegal projects. We therefore watch her mental state absolutely deteriorate from working this soul-crushing job, and it explores themes in capitalism, disillusionment, and the cost of ambition. I think Bateman would give this 5 stars from Goodreads. Firstly, I think he would actually agree on how soulless and superficial the corporate world is. I feel like Silicon Valley and Wall Street have similar kind of employees that work there, and I feel like the companies there are more obsessed with making money and just don't see their employees as human. Maybe that's a wild take, but I'm gonna stick with it. And when you read the book, you realize that Bateman doesn't really like his work. He just works there because his dad managed to land him a job there, and he's just trying hard to fit in. I think he'd also enjoy Ripe because he could probably see himself in the main character mentally spiraling throughout the book. Both characters seem to just suffer in this inner mental chaos for the entirety of the novels. And also, lastly, I feel like he'd like it because it is sort of critiquing modern society. I honestly think that he would ironically appreciate the commentary on consumerism and the moral detachment that comes with it. Like, even though he is a product of that culture because he just buys literally every single silly product, I think that he would almost see the book as satirical. But as books about work go, I think that he would really, really eat this one up. The third book on my list, which I think you'd enjoy, is Tender is the Flesh by Agustina Bazterrica. This is a dystopian book that is set in a future where animal meat is toxic to humans that consume it. And as a result, society then legalizes cannibalism. And in this story, we follow a guy who works at one of these human slaughterhouses, and he's the one who oversees and manages the operations of this facility. And one day, he's given a gift of a young woman to essentially consume, but we ultimately see him confront the morality of his actions and the world he lives in. I mean, I think just based on that description alone, you can kind of get why Bateman would like it. This book is super gory and bloody, and I just genuinely think that Bateman would just get off on the descriptions of that and probably give him some ideas on what to do with his own victims. I feel as though these extreme acts of violence and dehumanization of these people is just something he would very much just relate to the main character with. I also think that there's some interesting critique on consumerism and class, in that in this society, only the richest people can afford eating human meat. And I feel like Bateman would weirdly like this aspect of the book because he's rich himself and spends a lot of money on luxuries. And I feel like depending on how snobby he woke up that day, he's probably just like, yeah, you know what, rich people should be able to buy extravagant and ridiculous things if they want to. Sounds like a you problem if you're poor. But yeah, this is probably the goriest book on the list, and for obvious reasons, I feel like he would like it. For the fourth book on my list, I think he would very much dig Crime and Punishment by Fyodor Dostoevsky. This book follows a destitute and desperate former law student who wanders through the slums of St. Petersburg in Russia, and he commits an act of murder for money without any remorse or regret because he imagines himself to be above the conventional moral law. And he ultimately ends up embarking on a cat and mouse chase with the police detective until the main character is overcome by his guilt. Okay, so I think Patrick Bateman would really like this book because I think that he would agree with the main character's standpoint on intellectual justification for his actions. Because the main character operates under this view that he's just better than everyone else. And even though he recognizes that his own actions are bad, such as killing an old lady for murder, he rationalizes it by being like, well, I'm just better than everyone else, so I should be allowed to do it. And I feel like Bateman would very much relate to this self-constructed intellectual superiority to justify his behavior. I also think he'd like it because Crime and Punishment has very heavy themes in isolation, because the main character constantly alienates himself from those around him. And I think Bateman would relate to this because he's also lonely. Even though he socializes in these various groups of people, he only does it for career and professional gains. I just feel like he didn't have a personal connection with anyone. And also, I feel like he'd like this book because it just has pages and pages and pages of commentary about guilt, paranoia, and existential dread, which I'm not gonna lie, I think are Patrick Bateman's thoughts on the daily, so I'm sure that this book would honestly just be 5 stars for him. Moving on, the fifth book on my list is Perfume by Patrick Suskind. This story is set in 18th century France, and we follow a guy who isn't born with any natural body odor himself, but has an extraordinary sense of smell. And because he's born as an outcast in society, he feels invisible to those around him, but his sense of smell allows him to perceive the world in a way others can't. He therefore pursues a career in creating perfume, but it leads him down a dark path to create the ultimate perfume. And what other way to do that than trying to capture the sense of young women and murder them in the process? Again, woohoo, what a joy it is to be a woman. So even though that Bateman shares the same first name with the author, I think that he would like this book for a variety of reasons. Firstly, the main character has this absolutely unmovable obsession with perfection. Like, he will not stop until he's created the ultimate perfume, even if that means he has to commit some pretty horrific acts of murder. Bateman also has this relentless pursuit of having perfection in every single area of his life, from his body to his wardrobe, all the way to his social status. And I feel like both characters do this in order to have further control over people and use tactics to manipulate them. In the book, this man wants a perfume so that everybody around him will love him, and Bateman tries to look and just be perfect so everyone values him, so that way he can just manipulate people and flex how great he is. But at the end of the day, both characters feel very lonely and alienated from those around them, and they just feel like outsiders. So overall, I think that Bateman would really like this book, just in justifying his feelings and also the critique on the lack of connection in society. Okay, team, we are halfway there, and the sixth book on my list I think that he'd like is The Stranger by Albert Camus. This story revolves around a emotionally detached guy in Algeria, and even though it's a short book, we follow him in navigating his everyday life. And at the very start of the book, his mother dies, and he just literally is not bothered. He's literally just like, did she die today or did she die yesterday? I just don't know. And we just continue to witness his profound attachment to everything around him until one day he is involved in a murder, and we witness him confronts these consequences. This book is kind of similar to Crime and Punishment, but it is nowhere near as emotional. I actually think that Bateman would relate to this character more from the whole emotional detachment side. Like, I feel if Bateman also heard news about his mum dying, he would just be like, ugh, I can't be asked going to the funeral. And I think he would also like the circumstances in which the murder took place in this book. It's not really a spoiler, but the murder in this book was quite sudden, and I think that Bateman would really like how just impulsive and sudden this act of violence was. However, like Crime and Punishment, it does delve into some quite heavy existential themes. And I feel as though Bateman would very much be on board in questioning everything about his actions and just overanalyzing everything. Okay, we're going to be moving on to some classics now, because honestly, I think Bateman would like the classics. So the seventh book on my list is The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. So set in Victoria-era London, we follow a very handsome young man called Dorian Gray. And he essentially has his portrait done, but he wishes for the portrait to age and for him to stay forever young and beautiful. However, although his wish is granted, he should have been careful what he wished for, because with every sinful act he commits, the portrait gets uglier and uglier, until Dorian realizes that his eternal youth is actually a curse, as he finds that he's just never content with what he gets in life, and he ends up becoming very destructive. I actually personally think that this is my favorite classic book ever, so I'm just going to be hoping that Bateman likes this too. Firstly, Bateman would like it because I think that he would just foam at the mouth in jealousy at this guy's ability to stay forever young and beautiful. Bateman has one of the most elaborate skincare and exercise routines that I have ever seen, so he's obviously very, very aware of keeping his appearance in check. And I do not doubt that Bateman will probably make the deal with the devil in order to look amazing forever. Also, Dorian Gray leads a dual life of sorts also. He has a portrait that bears the true reality of his corruption, but he presents a very polished and perfect exterior to those around him, despite his true violent nature, which goes without saying I think is very similar to Bateman. This classic also critiques the superficiality of society, just showing how shallow everyone's become. And honestly, I do think that Bateman would be aware that his own lifestyle is being slated here, but again, I think he would see this in like a satirical way and enjoy it. Because also, I feel like Bateman doesn't really enjoy buying all these skincare products and exercising. He just does it in order to fit in and look perfect because he thinks that's what everybody else around him wants to see. So I don't know, maybe seeing aspects of his own life in this book will give him some sort of spiritual awakening to ditch it all. But yeah, anyway, I think he'd enjoy this book. For the eighth book on my list, another classic I think that he would really actually like is The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald. So this book is set in 1920s Long Island, and we follow a millionaire who has a very intense obsession with his ex-lover. He is a self-made millionaire hosting lavish parties for other people, but he's a very, very lonely soul, and he yearns for his ex-lover who is now married to another man. However, in being consumed to pursue this girl, it leads to some very, very tragic consequences. And the book basically shows how the relentless pursuit in the American dream only leads to falsehoods and downfalls. Again, kind of obvious why I think that Bateman would like this. Despite all the money and wealth that this millionaire has and being successful in the eyes of the American dream, he's still just absolutely miserable, and it shows how monetary and social status isn't always everything. Therefore, I think that Bateman can definitely relate to the darker and hollower side of success. And I also feel like both characters have a skewed perception of love and obsession. This millionaire has such an obsessive love for this girl that he almost really ignores the reality of life in order to have her. Like, he goes to some absolutely extreme lengths in order to win her affection. And whilst Bateman isn't necessarily fueled by feelings of love and compassion, I do think that he also goes to extreme lengths in order to impress people. Like, hosting these huge elaborate parties for other people is honestly something I could see Bateman doing, because he's not really doing it for himself, he's doing it in order to impress others. So yeah, even though I feel like Bateman would turn his nose up at this obsessive love, I still feel like there are aspects of this book that I do think he'd really enjoy. Okay, the last two books, we're really entering into the niche category of books I think he'd like. So hear me out when I talk about these. So the ninth book on my list is It Ends With Us by Colleen Hoover. I'm just kidding, Can you imagine? You would immediately dislike this video. No, all jokes aside, the book on my list is Atomic Habits by James Clear. This is a non-fiction book that essentially gives the psychology behind how habits are formed, and it offers practical guidance on how to form good habits and also how to break bad ones. The author presents a lot of research in showing the most effective way and why these work, as well as showcasing how making daily small changes can have big impacts overall. Put simply, Bateman is a control freak and he strives for discipline at all times. So I am convinced that he would love this book because I feel like it would just fuel his obsession with control over the details in his life. Like he's always striving to look better. And I feel like this book would help him be more efficient and productive in his routines in order to do so. I also just feel like telling other people you have good habits is quite a flex. Like, you know, there's annoying people that have to make a point of the fact that I get up at 6 a.m. every day to go on a run. Like, come on, you're just saying that to show off. So honestly, I just feel like Bateman would pick up this book in order to learn how to best start new habits, in order just to show off to people to gain their admiration and respect. You can try fight me on that one, but genuinely, I think you would love that book. And finally, the 10th and last book on my list that I think that he would honestly really like is Can't Hurt Me by David Goggins. This is a memoir written by a man who is one of the world's best endurance athletes. And throughout the book, he basically tells us his journey from his past in having an abusive father, his challenges with racism, and his struggles with obesity, and how he transformed into a completely different person through self-discipline and mental toughness. And put simply, this book just shows the evolution of a once fat and depressed man into literally one of the most physically insane people in the world. He pushes himself through ultramarathon running, ultra distance cycling, and triathlons. And he literally breaks barriers of what is thought that is physically possible by the human body. Firstly, I just think that Bateman would love this book because he would just be so impressed by this guy's pursuit for physical excellence. I'm not gonna lie, when I read this book, I literally thought that David Goggins was clinically insane. Like, there is no need to put yourself through all that trauma. I just think you must be mentally ill. And I honestly think that Bateman would love seeing the absolute crazy lengths this guy goes to and probably just see him as a role model of sorts. Like, honestly, I think that Bateman would respect the absolute crazy and insane lengths this guy goes to because he probably thinks, oh, that's so relatable. I go crazy lengths in order to dismember bodies. I also feel like Goggins has just this insane ability to not ever be swayed by his emotions and almost have these mental blocks just to focus on whatever activity is at hand. And Bateman seems to have no emotions either. So I think that he would just love a book about focusing on the task at hand and not literally feeling anything in the process. Because in American Psycho, there is literally pages and pages about what he does to bodies with literally no emotional response at all. So I just feel like he would heavily relate on this. Maybe it's niche, but I think he honestly would give this 5 stars on Goodreads. And there you have it. Those are all the books I genuinely think that Patrick Bateman from American Psycho would love. Have you read any of these books? If so, what did you think of them? Maybe you're more like Patrick Bateman than you think. If you think that he'd read some other books as well, let me know what you think they'd be in the comments. Guys, I'm not gonna lie, I loved doing this video. This was so much fun to do. I'm honestly thinking about starting a series where I just dress up as different fictional characters and suggest books that I think they'd like. Would you guys be interested in that, or is that a little bit too niche? Let me know what you think, and if you would generally want me to do that, then let me know what characters you want to see me suggest. That being said, if you enjoyed the video, please drop a like down below. My face is incredibly itchy from all this dry blood, so please show me some appreciation in putting this video together by giving me a like. And if you're new here, I promise I don't dress up as a psychopath every day. I drop new videos every Tuesday of videos about books, and if that's something you're into, I think you should definitely consider subscribing. Feel free to also follow me on Goodreads. I update what books I read on there in real time. And also feel free to follow me on my Instagram. I post more personal stuff on there, but I also post about books as soon as I finish reading them, so you can see what they're about and also what I've rated them out of 10. And always, thank you so much for being here, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!